Okay, this is a discussion that started earlier today. Well, it's longer ongoing, obviously, but it's a discussion about Composer in Joomla. I have had a workaround for JCB. I know that my workaround is like using a wire to fix a car, just wire and a set of pliers. And it's probably not the best way of managing this problem. So I tried explaining that here. Thank you, saying we currently use Composer in a painful, to say the least. I expect it to run into conflicts if more people would do it this way. So I understand the way I'm going to show you now in terms of how I'm managing this isn't ideal. So clearly this is the beginning of me entering this discussion and hoping that any feedback you guys may give might be helpful. I've taken notice of all these URLs here, and I was asked to then speak with George as well. So I'm probably going to share this video with you all, including George. Okay, so first thing, we have two libraries in JCB that is used in many components that I've built with JCB. So it's used in JCB itself, and it can use it in other libraries as well. I don't know if I should go. I think I'll spare you the explanation of how I get it in place, because that's just some script that the compiler moves the library into place. There are different ways that this is done. I'm not going to spend much time explaining that. I would say this: it ends up in the component package, which is a bit of a pain because it bloats the package. So the component might be only 4 meg, but the library is another 4 meg, and you end up with an 8 meg package. So that's painful. The way to segregate that is to give the library its own library package. So we are working towards that in JCB, that you can create a library package, and it could be compacted separate from the component and then included into a package PKG for component plugin modules and then the library. And this package can be big, but it has those other packages independently combined into this one package. This is obviously the objective where we're heading, that the library ends up in its own package. Currently it doesn't, because of just I'm not ready yet. Okay, so let's look at what I have done. So as you know, in Joomla there is the libraries folder, of course. Okay, and here you see I have a library called PHPExcel and PHP spreadsheet. So these two libraries is the libraries I'm using. And if we go into any of them, you see it's the normal Composer vendor folder type of library. The profit or the benefit of the PHP sibling is it doesn't have many dependencies. So it only has itself, which just makes it ideal for this type of approach, because you won't have that threat of collisions. But this one works, and this one is already active. And so I'm going to show you how it ends up in the package. Let me just go show you that. So in the package, it has a folder library, and it adds the library, and it adds the vendor and the autoloader, which basically executes the get loader of Composer, which means it just uses the Composer file. This package doesn't have the .htaccess file, but this isn't the package which we usually distribute. This is just for my local testing. the package we distribute actually gets sent through Git to the GitHub repository, and it has the, I can show you that quickly. So this is the repository version. If I open it up and we get to the vendor, we see the .htaccess is here. So we're protecting this, basically this folder with the htaccess in place, like basically how Joomla is doing it. And here's our library. Now, how to use the library in my component is the next part, which is straightforward. All JCB components currently are aimed at Joomla 3. So that's why it says Joomla 3 here. I don't know if you can see that. Anyway, which means it has a helper class, which is something we want to downsize at least. But currently it still does. And so there's an admin helper class and there is a site helper class. I'm going to show you the admin helper class, which is the same name as the component builder. This is the helper class from the admin, and in it we have the method to instantiate these libraries. So first we have a protected static composer array, because we could target more than one class. Let me just then scroll. Let me see. Okay, so there is a method here, composer autoload, and this target is the name of the folder that it needs to target. Now in JCB, this is always added to all helper classes of all components. So even if you don't use a composer library, it's still being added currently. So that means it's using a dynamic way to execute the load. And so this target gets concatenated to compose and the target name as the function name. This was just me trying to get it work. And then we check if this class exists in the helper class, because you as the programmer of the component needs to know about this convention if you want to use composer before you. So that means you write this function in JCB and add it to your component. We just add this. So you have this convenience to call this method and add a function that gets executed on the call of this method. Now, to show you one of these methods, we have two of them. So we have this compose PHPExcel, and it just requires the library's vendor autoloader and then adds it to that array I showed you in the beginning that it was loaded, so it doesn't load it again. I know it's probably not necessary, but I'm usually overdoing it. So this is the part that the developer adds. So the other script is only used to load this library, loaded once. So I'm not using the J loader here. I'm just including the autoloader once, and that's it. So here in my wrapper class for the SFTP accessing this, I'm basically just triggering that original class with the folder name that I want loaded, and it runs it every time I call this, and so it basically runs it once, and then it checks if the class exists, and if not, we just end there. But otherwise we actually instantiate it here, and from there on I'm using it. Now I'm using this is not necessary to explain, but I'm caching this for future use, basically making that we can reuse that instantiation in this one method. Okay, so there's different ways it instantiates, but this is the get SFTP. And so the way Composer then works is it just runs this everywhere I need it. And then I never then call this directly. I just call get SFTP as a helper method anywhere. And I pass it the server ID, which again is database related, where it gets the server details from the database. Okay, so that's a quick overview of how I am getting Composer to run inside a component, yet inside library folder. I know it's maybe a painful thing to see the way I did it, but it's working for me with this one very well. I never have issues. So what happens every time before I compile the component and send out a next release, I go into that folder and just update the folder with Composer, and obviously for not for development, so that it's minimized the code load. Now that works well with this library, but now let's look at another one. Another library is this PHPExport, which is actually the better one from PHPExcel. It's the new library. Now PHPExcel is what's still being advised as use case for Joomla. I don't know why. Probably just not. There's just not someone to update it yet. But let me show you what I mean. This documentation of using CSV and XLSX is basically making use of that library. So that's PHPExcel library. It's a package, library package, and it was the one we've always used. The problem though is this is totally depreciated library, and everybody is advised to move to the new library. So that's what I have there in that folder. This one here, this is the new library. So again, created just a folder here, and inside it instantiated it with Composer, having its own vendor. But now here we start with having packages like this one and this one, which could be part of other Composer dependencies. And my limited knowledge, I suspect that these things are going to cause conflicts if both gets loaded, because I am not really doing any checks to try and mitigate collisions when the same class namespace is used. Maybe I don't understand how that works. I'm just being honest. But I'm busy in the process, actually, as we speak, to integrate this new library, PHPExport, into JCB. Why? Because JCB has a feature in every admin view to import and export the data into a spreadsheet, and it's still making use of the old library. And so we have an issue here on GitHub, number 444, where we started discussion about this problem. And we've had many give input. At the end of this discussion, you see those methods I showed you in the helper class, and me giving some reason for going this way. You see, the problem is the client we're targeting doesn't know anything about Composer. It's not like I could tell them run Composer and then install the component. There's just not going to work. You need to be able to ship your library with your component. This is the issue, and you want to have it that other components don't add it again. That's why I'm adding it currently to the library area, so that everybody in JCB community, which is becoming more and more people, programmers, that they all use the same library, and that it just updates that folder with the one. Now I haven't made a convention that will check that the update only takes place with if it's newer. So it's like I'm locking it down for everyone in JCB to a certain version, and I'm sort of not sure how to manage that, because if I make an update and move the version up, it's going to affect everyone. Unless people become true to object orientation and they don't mess up the function signatures, inputs, which is often the case in PHP. But anyway, that's another rant for another day. So here is that instantiation. I'm basically going to adapt this so that it can now also be used for this library, PHP spreadsheet. And I also explain here why the packaging option and the pain of all that. So if I know you've got like 1,000 things on your plate, maybe you don't have time for reading this, but I am very much open for education on this level. I want to help solve the problem, but I'm not even sure I understand the problem. What I've explained is how much I've understood. I know that it is officially said that you can't mess with Composer in Joomla 3 unless you put it in your own, like I'm doing it separate from the actual Composer vendor folder. But like I said, I think there's a place where we need to look at what that means when you start seeing this. Now I know the way the simple cache here is declared and instantiated is different from if I go to the one in Joomla. This has a container and a source, and it has different files in it even. So these do look different. I didn't go into them. I didn't read in the files exactly the classes and what's the differences, but I saw that they at least have the same folder name, and it could be that this is another version. I didn't investigate it yet. And then there are dependencies here, and this is all part of the spreadsheet, PHP spreadsheet library that I want to use, and I'm gonna ship this with every component that JCB builds that wants to use ImportExport in the admin view. So that means every component from now on in JCB that makes use of the ImportExport function. Now let me show you what I mean by ImportExport. So if you have an admin view, you have an option to export the data and import the data. And this is by default built into every admin view that you build with JCB. So you can very easily import and export data sets. So you basically select here and export the data, and it gives you an XLS file with the columns from the database. And so that is what I'm primarily using that library for. And so until now, I did the awful thing of adding the library to the component helper folder, which means massive code all the place, everywhere. Every component has it, and that is a pain just to start with. So this is me trying to come back to some order, at least to bring some unity, putting the library in Joomla once and having all the components aim back to this folder is the step I'm taking with the specific two libraries at the moment. It's the only ones I need. But as the other JCB guys add more functionality to their components, JCB has the option to add your own library. So let's say this one, for example, isn't part of JCB by default, but you want it in your component. JCB has a way for you to add it as a library and ship it with your component with that name and convention. And it will then, in effect, if you install a component, overwrite that folder. This is a bit of a side effect, because if another component, developer has shipped his with a newer version and they both use the same file name, you're gonna overwrite his newer one with your older one, depending on whose composer pool was the newest or the latest, with which version they were using as well. Okay, so that means, like I said before even starting, the way I'm managing this currently is a very painful one. The other option was to add these again within a subfolder, like a company folder. So you have it per company. So for example, you would have a new folder, BDM, or JCB even, could be like a convention. And then all these end up inside, wait, let's copy it instead, end up inside here. And then we just update our initial, the one who activates them. Because the problem we have in this is that many components don't need them. So in JCB specifically, you don't want to have it like with Joomla, ship it by default with those libraries. You only want it that the developer that actually makes use of them, that only they ship it. And so I'm currently controlling the version for 200-300 developers who use JCB to build components. This is the only sphere that I currently can control. I cannot speak for the other how many thousands of developers, but I can manage at least these 400 to use just one library version, and then they would make a query, and when I update it for everyone. Just like now, moving from this one to that one, I'm writing the wrapper classes, methods, and everything for everyone. So most of them won't even know something changed because it just continues to work as before. And only those who might have started using it themselves in another implementation might notice a difference, but they can just again make it very easily, fix it, and then they're ready to go, because we're setting the implementation standard for everyone in this way. Okay, I think that's enough. I'm trying to get this out just to start the discussion. I don't know where this discussion should take place. Marco suggested I just reach out to George at first, but I actually think this should be something more advanced guys to talk together, because when you look at Composer itself, it's autoloader triggering these different classes, and how it knits the actual inheritance and dependencies into the load makes it very hard, because the moment you have this one again, and maybe these two share a dependency, but because you're initiating them independently of each other, having each their own composer, basically vendor folder, you end up loading the dependency twice. Now, I don't know how to isolate those environments. Maybe there is a way that I can prevent these two environments, this environment and that environment, then from clashing. I know Snap, for example, in Ubuntu now is also starting to move into this way, where in the past, you installed a component or a extension in Ubuntu, and it was using the existing frameworks that is already in the system. So not to, for easy code reuse. That's the motto, right? Then Snap came along, and Snap literally creates a isolated environment for every application, so that it's no longer dependent on other applications. It can set its own environment. This is a thought which probably is the direction we should think in terms of Composer as well. Instead of trying to consolidate it, we'll probably just have to accept the trade-off that we're going to have dependencies in different places, but that these dependencies would then be allowed to have their versions in a way that it's, useful for that implementation. That is sort of my that's my consideration on the topic. I do feel over my head in this. I think there's a lot of things I'm not using Composer every day. I'm not that fluent in it in terms of understanding how to sidestep some of its limitations. Okay, so please talk back to me.